What is up, LTD? Drew Tidwell here, personally registered in business by EDC's Danny and Renata Snipes. So blessed to have that relationship, and of course, so thankful for Larry and Pam as well. DK, wowzers. I'm gonna have to do my best here to try to live up to some of that, but guys, I am so fired up. How about all the profitability that you're seeing across new IBOs, people in business, 6 months, 12 months? It's just good stuff. And so as we dive in, we gotta go first things first. First things first, I think we all understand that the Amway business, the profitability of the Amway business, it's all about sales, right? Simply put, no sales, no income. And so you're gonna be hearing about sales training and ways to create verified customer sales throughout this weekend. But tonight, that is not going to be my focus. I was asked to talk specifically about once you've got some traction creating customer sales, you're now eligible to start sponsoring and building selling teams. And that's what we're gonna hone in on, is how do we start building those selling teams? And so I wanna give you a little context here. Just a few years ago, a handful of years ago, Steph and I's business was stuck. Now, we were platinums, but we had been at the platinum level for quite some time, and it just felt like whatever we were trying to do, no matter how hard we worked, it was like a revolving door. People getting started, people getting out of business. We just could not gain traction. We just felt like we couldn't move the needle. And then we made a pivot. Now, here's the interesting thing, is what I'm gonna talk about tonight, it may be new to some of you who are brand new in business, but for you veteran IBOs, what I'm gonna do is not teach you something new. I'm gonna ask you to do what Steph and I did a few years ago, which is to remember something better. Remember something better. I think so many times there's so much noise, there's so much great content out there, it's very easy to get distracted and lose sight of keeping the main thing the main thing. So you might ask, like, what did we remember? So here's what I wanna do. If you'll allow me, I'd like to take you back to 1980, all right? Or maybe the mid 80s, we'll call it. I was probably 2 or 3 years old. Some of you guys are like, Drew, it's hard for me to go back to the 80s because I wasn't even born yet. I get it. But go back with me, mid to late 80s. And what I wanna do tonight is I want to kind of explore the minds of the late 80s of some of the GOATs in the Amway business. A Larry Winters, a Gary Newell, a Danny Snipes. You got a Joe Markowitz. Let's unpack things that I've been blessed to learn now for 2 decades from these gentlemen and their brides on how to properly build teams. How do we build teams that activate, that onboard? How do we up renewal rates? All of those things, that's what we're gonna dive into. So before you tune me out, we're gonna talk about this philosophy, this mindset that these guys did. And if you're a veteran, don't turn the volume down, because I think what you're gonna see here is that, man, maybe we approach this at a little bit of a different angle. So let's talk about a filtering mindset. That's what they had, a filtering mindset. And when you really break it down, there's, I guess, 2 different philosophies or strategies or mentalities that you can go out when you start sponsoring other IBOs that you can go out with. One would be a recruiting and a selling type mentality. The other one would be a filtering mentality, looking for people that are looking. And so I'll just tell you this, when activation and onboarding is bad, I'll give you an example here. I've had a lot of people reach out and they'll say, hey, Drew, we've heard about some growth on your team and this team and that team over there. And, what are you guys doing to onboard people? What are you guys doing to activate people? And the statement they make is, we don't have a sponsoring problem. We have an onboarding issue or an activation issue. And what I normally reply back with is, that actually means that you probably have a sponsoring problem. That doesn't mean that people aren't getting started in business, but maybe the way that we're prepping people, properly preparing them before they come into business, is actually causing the issue. So many times, if you want to fix the outcome, you actually need to go back and fix something at the beginning of your process. And for most people, self-included, when we were stuck a handful of years ago, that's what we had lost sight of. We had gotten sloppy with this filtering mindset and started, gradually sliding into this concept of like somewhat being desperate, recruiting, selling, forgot the value that this team and the leadership and all the resources and what the Amway business provides. We lost sight of the value that brings to people. So as we dive into this, if we don't properly prepare people for business ownership before they actually become an independent business owner, the odds of them sticking are drastically reduced, right? On the same token, We want to give people a chance to build a case for themselves. If we don't allow them to build that case for themselves and demonstrate some certain character traits, we run the risk of doing a lot of work but having very little progress, especially now with the fact that Amway is comping a brand new business owner's first year registration. And then how about leadership team development comping 1 year's worth of training with that first Amway contract year for a new IBO, all the training, resources, content, complimentary. I mean, who does that? I've never heard in my life of a business that someone can start with no barrier of entry, literally zero financial barrier of entry, and receive all the training and take this bad boy on a test drive for a year, and they have the benefit of developing skills and all kinds of things, to ensure the best we can to help them get profitable in their business. So we have to be careful with that though, right? When you start, comping everything for people, you can imagine almost anybody could step into your organization on your team. And so we just want to be strategic about how we do that. So let's set this up a little bit. Ultimately, you've probably heard that we're all born with 3 innate fears. The first fear is the fear of falling. The second fear is the fear of loud noises. And the third fear is receiving a notice from the IRS in the mail, all right? Those are our 3 innate fears. But when it pertains to this business, there's 2 fears that if we don't squash them can really make it difficult, in my opinion, to gain traction. The first fear is the fear of rejection. The fear of rejection. I would say that most adults are far more afraid of being rejected and looking silly than they are of falling as they get older in life, right? The second one is the fear of change. The fear of change. None of us really love change. People want to change their outcomes, they want to change their results, but we're not so excited oftentimes about changing our daily routine, how we spend our time, and getting outside of our comfort zone. So here's the bottom line for me is that when I learned the mindset, the philosophy, the strategy of filtering that these guys taught me, what it did is it helped squash my fear of ever feeling rejected. But what's also cool is it simultaneously, when you really understand what we're going to talk about, it simultaneously squashes a prospect's fear of change. So let's talk about what that looks like and break it down a little bit. So again, essentially 2 different mindsets. Are we selling and convincing, persuading people to come into business? Or are we assessing and then advising them on how this business may be able to actually help benefit their situation and their goals? Are we manufacturing interest, or is the objective just to locate interest? I'm not trying to make somebody interested or make somebody look. I'm just trying to find people who are already looking in the first place. Am I recruiting or filtering? See, here's the thing. When we're recruiting, here's what you're going to find out. I have found that when I was in a recruiting mindset, this was a numbers game. Man, throw mud up on the wall, pray some of it sticks. The challenge is these are people, not mud. And so when we say it's a numbers game, I actually think that's a really sloppy phrase that we throw out, because what we should really be thinking is this is a skills game. And when we get skilled, when we know who we're looking for, the mindset, some of the attributes we're looking for, we get very, very skilled. And I believe that, not to say we don't have to go through numbers, but we don't have to go through more numbers than maybe we should. So bottom line, guys, is the LTD's approach to the Amway business is to have a filtering mindset, to be a match finder, not a match maker. We're looking for lookers, as I said before. Okay, so how does a filtering mindset help squash our fear of rejection? Well, when we pitch and someone says no, we feel rejected. But when we filter and someone says no, they're not saying no to us, they're saying no, I'm not open-minded. They're saying no to themselves. And so my advice to you would be, ditch the pitch. It's gonna free you up if you just let go of that mentality. Let me tell you a story. Pre-filtering mindset, I heard Larry tell a story years ago where he was working at a car wash, and a gentleman rolled in and Larry started a conversation. Larry, I believe, was somewhat of a new IBO and new to his business journey. And this gentleman and him start conversing, and Larry brings up his business. And I don't know verbatim what he said, but Larry he was excited, but he had a bit of a recruiting mindset. Again, this is pre-filtering, okay? And so long and short of it is the guy says, "Are you talking about Amway?" And Larry froze. And because he was recruiting, or what have you, there was a part of him that felt like, man, if I say yes and this guy is not interested in Amway or whatever, I'm going to feel rejected. So when the guy said, are you talking about Amway? Larry said, no. Okay? And I think it just stumped him. Well, here's what's interesting. The guy goes, oh man, I was hoping it was. I talked to a gentleman a while back out on the West Coast before I moved out here. We lost touch. I haven't been able to get up with him. I've been looking for someone that could sponsor me in the Amway business. So Larry gets off of work. He calls his upline on the phone, and he's just like, you will not believe what happened. And he's like, what? He goes, I was talking to this guy about my business, and all of a sudden, he asked if it was Amway, and I said no. And he said he was ready to get in. And so Larry was, having this moment, and he's like, what do I do? And his upline said, man, just relax first off. He said, but that's no big deal. He said, here's all you need to do. Next time you see him at the car wash, he comes back through, just tell him that since you last saw him, you got started in the Amway business and now you can sponsor him. And Larry's like, oh my gosh, you're a genius, right? So fast forward, the guy actually comes back to the car wash. Larry sees him, he's jumping for joy, he can't wait, he runs over and tells the guy, I got started in the Amway business, I can get you started. And the guy goes, oh man, congratulations, that's awesome. He said, I got started too. Now here's the rest of the story. That guy, Larry's caught wind later on, that guy got started and just crushed this thing. Well, that's probably about all it took. One experience like that, if you've had it, right? Because we all have had experience like that. Any moment like that, and all of a sudden it starts to really kind of be sobering, and you go, you know what? There's got to be a better way to do this. And so Gary Newell, Larry Winters, these guys get together, they start ironing things out, and there's a filtering mindset that's introduced. And I think we can all agree, without me having to go into specifics, the filtering mindset has brought Larry a long way from that car wash, hasn't it? All right. So the bottom, as we kind of look at this, right? He was bobbing and weaving, and like many of us have, I've lived this. We're trying to avoid rejection, and it all goes back to our mindset. So we're going to talk about a mindset, and we're going to talk about a framework. Let's unpack this mindset a little bit. Now, for this filtering mindset to work, it starts with this. You have to emotionally detach yourself from the outcome. Whether they're looking or not looking, open-minded or not, we have to emotionally detach ourselves from the outcome. So what's the sequence of this? How do we really know if someone might be a good prospect for us to potentially help start an Amway business? Well, the first thing I would say is, number one, are they looking? Another way to ask that is, are they open-minded? And I'm not here to get into specifics of how you find that out or ask. You get with your coach, you get with your upline. They can work out and iron out the specific verbiage and that kind of thing. But the question is, are you looking? Hey, how open-minded would you be to blank, right? Create an additional income. Whatever your coach teaches you, run that play. But this is the genius of a filtering mindset. When I ask someone how open-minded they are to creating additional income, if they say yes, if they say no, or if they say depends on what it is, which, by the way, are the only three responses that I've ever gotten when I ask that question. I get a yes, I get a no, and I get a depends on what it is. But regardless of that answer, the beauty of this mindset is that all three of those answers are a correct answer. They're all a success. It is 100% successful 100% of the time. Now, that's not to imply that everyone we ask that question to, we end up sponsoring. No, it's quite the contrary. It means that we are coming from a place of honesty and transparency and trying to find out, is this person actually looking? All the answers they give, any of those three, would be a success. Now, this is nothing new. Asking people if they're open-minded, asking people if they're keeping their options open, looking for something. This is nothing new. We've been doing this our entire life. Let me give you some examples. When we're a kid, we call up a buddy and say, hey man, you want to come over and hang out? You want to come over and play? And if that friend said no, what'd you do? I don't think most of us took that as some massive personal rejection. Instead, we just called our other buddy down the street and we found a yes, right? We found somebody who wanted to come over and play. If you've ever worked at a restaurant or you've ever been to a restaurant, the server comes around and they're asking, excuse me, would you like coffee or would you like ketchup? And if they get 3 or 4 no's in a row, have you ever seen them throw the coffee pot down and smash it all over the place? Or you ever seen them bust up the ketchup bottle and ketchup go everywhere because they're aggravated? People keep telling them no? Of course not. Why? Because they're just asking a question. They're filtering. They're saying, do you want it? Do you not want it? And it's really the same mentality. Hey, you might call somebody up and say, hey guys, y'all want to play basketball on Saturday? And if I call up 3 or 4 people and they're all, booked up, or it's a bad timing, or, they hurt their knee, or whatever the situation, they're just giving me no's, then here's the thing. I don't take that personal, but this is the kicker. That doesn't change the fact that I want to still go play basketball. So I'm going to still pick up the phone or shoot those texts and figure out who wants to play so we can still hoop it up on Saturday, right? So let me give you a quick analogy here. This filtering mindset for me, it protected me and it provided for me. And I'll give you, this. So the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge started taking place in 1933. Now, the first phase of this bridge was the lower phase, so it was closer to the water. And from 1933 to 1936, 23 people over 3 years fell off the lower portion of that bridge while it was being constructed to their death. Now, this was going on shortly after the Great Depression, what have you. So they had fences, safety fences outside the construction site, and there were people waiting in line for somebody to fall. These guys were unemployed. They were waiting for somebody to fall to be able to seize their job. That's how crazy it got. So they decide, you know what, we need to do something about this. So they do something crazy. They install a safety net that cost $130,000 in 1936. Now that would have been the equivalent of millions of dollars in today's, with inflation. But from 1936 to 1937, they had 11 deaths. They cut the death rate in half. In fact, 10 of those 11, it was a freak accident where a scaffold fell down and 10 people died at one time. So it wasn't even the falling of them, falling off the bridge. It was the scaffold falling down on them. So the bottom line is, one person actually fell to their death. But what's crazy is that practically, outside that one guy, practically no one fell, because that safety net eliminated their fear of falling. Well, this filtering mindset, whether I got a yes, a no, or depends on what it is, what that did for me is it eliminated my fear of being rejected, okay? So that's what it looks like. The second thing, so are they open-minded? Are they looking? The second thing, do they have a gap? What do you mean a gap, Drew? Great question. Here's a gap. Where they're currently at compared to where they'd like to be. Do they have a gap? Do they have some form of a goal? And then once I find out if they have a gap, I can start to figure out, hey, is the path they're currently on going to help close that gap? Sometimes they may express a gap they have, and the Amway business might not be able to help them close it. And I'm not saying some people have huge goals and dreams, and I can't make guarantees that this business in and of itself is going to close their gap, but maybe it can at least help. It could be a step in the right direction, and we can make progress moving in that arena. Have you ever talked to somebody and the conversation's going well, but when you ask them what they do, they talk about, well, I do this for a living, and they really like their job. Well, I don't want to put people down that like their job. That's a great thing, right? And so here's a great question to ask. Hey, it sounds like things are going pretty well for you. I guess, is there anything you would change about your situation if you could, though? See, what you're doing there is you're asking a question, and all of a sudden, they love their job, they really enjoy it, they like the people they work with, they've got a promotion, all these things. But when you ask, hey, is there anything you would change if you could, though? Now, I can start to detect, does this person even have a gap? Why is this huge? Because if someone doesn't have a gap, or much of a gap, what kind of resolve are they really going to have to build a business, to do hard things, to learn something new, to get outside their comfort zone? Probably not a whole lot, right? How uncomfortable is someone truly willing to get if they don't have something that really matters enough to them that they're willing to work hard to go get it? So I just believe this. I believe that once we help people discover what their gap is or find their gap, and then they start to kind of realize that what they're currently doing by itself can't close that gap, they need to do something extra. Here's the kicker. They now start selling themselves and you on why they need to do something instead of us having to sell them on why they should do what we do. Hopefully that makes sense. So are they looking? Do they have a gap? Number 3, do they have urgency? Oh, this is huge. Have you ever talked to somebody, maybe you even had 3, 4, 5 conversations, you spent quite a bit of time conversing back and forth and educating them about things, only at the end of whatever process you're running, then they come back and say, we just don't have time. Oh, I don't know if there's anything more frustrating than that, honestly. Because you've invested all this time and energy, why didn't they tell you that on the front end? Well, you know what? I've actually taken personal responsibility. If I hear that excuse or that reason on the back end after multiple conversations, I believe that's my fault, not their fault. Because what that tells me is I did not detect or find out, do they have an urgency to close their gap? So I like asking people questions like, man, so maybe their goal is to make additional income for fill in the blank. And I might say, well, hey, why do you feel like now's the right time though? I want to kind of get to the bottom line of, do they have some urgency? Why is now the right time now, though, right? When would you like to get there? When would you like to accomplish that? Are we talking 6 months? Are we talking it's a 20-year goal? I want to feel out, is there some urgency? Because here's what I want you to remember, okay? When we're struggling to onboard and activate, usually there's an issue with our process. So I just summarize. If we can detect urgency, oftentimes urgency will yield better activation, right? Because there's a little pep in their step once they register in the Amway business. So there's that. Why is it important to do something about this now? And then the fourth thing is, what are their pain points? They've got a gap. There's urgency. You can detect they really want to do something about it. They want to make some changes in their life, right? You can sense that. So the question is, why haven't they already done something? What's been the pain point? What's held them back? And this part, I think, is really crucial when you're filtering, because it's going to give you the data you need so that you can determine if the Amway business can actually help them close the gap and solve the problem, okay? And so, when you really think about what are the pain points people have? I'll give you a couple of them. The first one, I don't know where to start. That's a pain point. Hey, why haven't you already done something? I just don't know where to start. They're lacking a vehicle. Does the Amway business give us a vehicle? You bet it does. The second thing, well, I've had some ideas, but I just don't have the capital. A lot of people have that capital, that financial concern. Does complimentary registration from Amway, does complimentary training from Leadership Team Develop for that first year, does that help with the capital concern? You bet it does. A lot of times people say, I just didn't know how. I don't know how to do it. I lack mentorship. I lack knowledge. Man, do we have resources? Do we have people, human beings, us, you guys, right? Can we step in and help with that knowledge and that coaching? Absolutely. Another one is, I don't have much time. Well, if someone's working full time, maybe they're married, got a couple kids, time is limited. They have to be incredibly precise. But what's beautiful about this business is that the Amway business allows us to build something in our spare time with a lot of flexibility and versatility. So once I know what their gap is, there's urgency, I know a few of the stumbling blocks, the challenges they've had that have prevented them from maybe owning a business in the past, here's what I can now do. I can now articulate how the Amway business with the LTD approach, right, can support them and help them overcome those hurdles and actually be their own boss and start a business. So open-minded, gap, urgency, and pain points. My advice is to ditch the pitch. Okay, now let's very quickly talk about framework, and I got to do this fast. So the way we go about all of this is absolutely crucial. We live in an antitrust world. And it's, I feel like it's just gotten a little bit worse the last couple of years, being completely honest. We just live in an antitrust world. We live in a world where people tend to believe everything that they say and nothing that we say or you say or they say, right? It's like what I say is gold, what you say is garbage. That's kind of the mentality of a lot of people. And so instead of fighting that, let's figure out how to work with this mentality. So presentations create blockages. Conversations create buy-in. Speeches build walls. Questions build bridges. The best IBOs I know, they don't flood prospects with information about the business. Now, they're going to educate them and teach them, but they're not just out there giving a sales pitch. Here's what the best IBOs I know do. They ask questions. They ask good questions, and they help that prospect discover for themselves that the Amway business could be a viable solution to help them start closing that gap or accomplishing some of those goals. So when we start to present, when we're assumptive, when we're trying to posture people, when we say hey, I know how you feel, I felt the same way. Here's what I found. I've taught this. The challenge is everyone's taught that for 100 years. People can sniff that out a million miles away. And that banter, that sales banter actually causes buyer resistance, distrust, and what have you. And so the real key here is to be real. Right? Not to subscribe to these prehistoric methods that were written in a sales book 100 years ago, but to understand we just need to be genuine and real and enter conversations. And here's the kicker. I don't go into the conversation trying to sponsor that prospect. I go into the conversation to see, is there even an IBO to sponsor? Does it even make sense? Is it even a possible match? The other thing is this. We live in an antitrust world, and the other thing we're fighting is people hate change. Again, they want to change results, they want to change outcomes, but most people are not excited about disrupting their life and making those changes. So how do we get people that don't trust us much on the front end and to do something they hate, which is the change? Because, man, change is a hard sell. At the end of the day, it's a very hard sell. So how do we do this? Well, let me ask you a question. Would it be fair to say if the reason was important enough or big enough, just about anyone would do just about anything to get it? Well, there you go. That's the secret if there is one. It's to ask people questions and help those prospects discover that, their reason to move, to take action, to change, that gap, that's what we got to help them find. When they find that gap, urgency starts to show up, and now we can educate them on how this business could potentially be a solution to those obstacles. So how does filtering mindset squash a prospect's fear of change? Because the change was their idea, it wasn't our idea. I want to ask questions, and they sell themselves on why they do this. And here's why. Because it's much easier for them to quit on my idea than it is for them to quit on their idea. Much easier for them to quit on a business I sold to them than a business that they decided to start and build themselves. So I think you're going to find a couple things about this LTD approach to the Amway business and filtering. I think you're going to find it feels better because it's honest, it's transparent, it builds trust. People are going to sense that you're authentic. I think you're going to find out that it works every single time. And again, I don't mean it sponsors everyone you talk to. I just mean that whether they say yes, no, or depends on what it is, you're not going to feel rejected. You're going to feel invigorated because you understand who you're looking for. And I also think you're going to find it protects people's belief level because you're going to stop, maybe sponsoring as many IBOs on selling teams that quit before they ever get started. They don't ever place their first order. They don't ever make that first sale. We're going to start to minimize some of that stuff. That protects belief level and it helps stop the revolving door. So I want to tell you a story, okay? As I'm starting to wind down here a little bit, a couple quick rapid fire things. One, begin with the end in mind. I love this list. Gary Newell talks about who am I looking for? He gives this great list and he says, man, the first thing is, are they hungry? Do they have some ambition? Number two, are they relatable? Do you connect with the person a little bit? Do you enjoy being around them a little bit? Number three, are they reliable? Is there some accountability? And number four, this is the cherry on top. If they've got it, it's awesome. Do they have some credibility? That's not a blue collar or a white collar thing. That's just, hey, in their circle, do people trust them? Are they likable? Do they have some level of credibility? Boy, if you've got those four things, you might just have a good prospect that you're conversing with. The second tip, don't force it. There's a corporate term that says that, fire before you hire. Now, we're not hiring employees, but man, the best time to filter someone out is before they register. It'll help protect reputation. The third tip, if it's a flow, it's a go. I think sponsoring the right IBO should actually feel quite easy. Now, I'm not saying doing the work is easy, but once we're in that process of conversations, it should feel quite easy. They've got good response time, they're keeping appointments, they're communicating, they're eager to get resources and learn more about things. Why? Because they've got a gap and they've got urgency. I hope this is making sense, okay? So, then you just got to go get the reps in. Now, I've talked a lot of logic here, but what I want to tell you is this. The game changer for me in this filtering mindset, entering the minds of these guys and unpacking, is that I had the revelation that this is a gift. Let me tell you a quick story and I'm done. Heard a story about a 16-year-old boy. Came from a good, middle-class home and everything in life was great. And all of a sudden, due to some poor choices going on in his father's life, all of a sudden he woke up one day and his dad wasn't around anymore. He walked out on this 16-year-old, his mom, and his two sisters. And this boy, this teenage boy, facing all these big life decisions and trying to figure out, good gracious, man, who am I? My hero is gone. He left us, and there's this identity gap. And then I heard this story about, the solution comes along where all of a sudden he meets this gentleman who had character and had integrity, and he was a successful business owner, and he showed interest in this young boy, this 16-year-old kid. And he just started speaking life into him. And he found out that this kid had some goals. He had a gap. This kid had some urgency. This kid had some pain points and things that were holding him back and some self-image stuff he was working through. And this successful businessman chose to give this 16-year-old kid a chance. Well, that 16-year-old kid was Drew Tidwell. And that successful businessman was a guy named Danny Snipes. And see, here's what I can look back on. Is that, yes, Steph and I have been blessed to build a successful business, and Danny or Renata have rightfully so profited off of some of those sales and the things that we've been able to create through the Amway compensation plan. But you know what? I have been the I have been the one to benefit out of that exchange. I look back, our life has been so blessed. He gave me cause, he gave me vision, he gave me a chance to make impact, he introduced me to a phenomenal team of people. You have the gift. The filtering mindset is you're the gift giver, man. Don't devalue what you have your hands on. Go out there. Everyone deserves to know. Filter, filter, filter. Let's get it, you guys.